Okay, everybody, let's begin. Uh, Hi, everyone. This particular event is the second in a series of events that's brought to you by Mang Prayogshara, Bahujan Economists, and the Rethinking Economics India Network. This series of events focuses on diversity and representation within the academic ecosystem of economics within the country. And today's session particularly focuses on the domains of policy and governance within the subject area. And today we will be joined by Amit Thorat, Beena Pallical, and Tejas Harad um, to facilitate the discussion that will be brought to you very shortly. Um, Now, as a brief introduction to the speakers and to the three organizations, um, the Rethinking Economics India Network is the national network of the global rethinking economics movement. It operates as a nationwide ecosystem of stakeholders in the space of pluralist and heterodox economics. It looks to interface with individuals, universities, civil society, and the private sector in order to encourage teaching, learning, and discussion for better and more inclusive economics for the country. Bahujan Economists is a platform for researchers, scholars, students, and professors belonging to the SC, ST, and the OBC communities in economics to collaborate and support each other, and for allies to extend support to them. The organization, along with an attempt to increase these communities' representation in research, um, another objective of theirs is to put forward that these communities' perspectives that have largely been absent from the mainstream discussion till now. And lastly, Mang Prayogshala is a team of research authors, assistants, and interns. And they currently work in the areas of psychological and economic academic research. Their aim is to enhance the practicability of the disciplines that they function in through the use of research software, research databases, and research management tools. And lastly, to introduce the speakers and Tejas, who is our discussant for today, um, Amit Thorat is the assistant professor of economics at the Center for the Study of Regional Development at JNU New Delhi. Prior to this, he's worked as an associate fellow at the National Council for Applied Economics Research, where he was part of the India Human Development Survey team. He obtained his PhD degree in economics from the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, also in JNU. And his research areas have been on the issues of income, education, and health inequalities in general, and across social, ethnic, and religious groups in particular within the context of India. And at the present, he's working on understanding people's beliefs around personal and social identity within the country and its implications for social behavior, individual distress, and economic outcomes. Um, Beena Pallical is currently the General Secretary of Dalit, Arthik, Adhikar, Andolan, and coordinates the national coalition of SCP TSP legislation and is also the executive director of the South Asia Dalit Women's Economic Empowerment Program of the Asia Dalit Lights Forum. She has been with the NCDHR for the last 11 years, working on the Dalit economic rights topical theme with a special focus on Dalit women's economic rights. And she's been passionately working towards policy changes within the central and the state governments for the development of Dalit and Adivasi communities. He has been demanding for the inclusion of Dalit women in the policy formation, and her main focus of work continues to be on economic justice and specifically looking at the same issue through a gender equity and equality lens. Um, and another focus area of hers has also been ensuring students' access to higher education and communities across public entitlements. And finally, Tejas currently works as a copy editor at the Economic and Political Weekly, and in an independent capacity, he regularly writes commentary pieces on Indian politics, technology, media, and the social movements. Lately, his writing has focused on India's caste system and the anti caste movement's challenge to this oppressive social structure. His writings have been featured in the Hindustan Times, The Mint, The Wire, News Laundry, Roundtable India, BuzzFeed India, Lok Satha, and other publications in English and Marathi. Tejas was a journalist fellow at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism in 1920. where his research focused on the underrepresentation of Bahujan journalists and news media. And he also runs a web portal called the Satyashodhak. And Tejas, now I now hand the mic off to you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Yash. Uh, uh, you all want to hear Amit Thorat and Beena Pallical. So I won't take much of your time. I'll just introduce today's topic. We will mostly be talking about higher education today and inequalities, underrepresentation there. But to start with, I think we also need to talk about primary education because that is the basis of the education system. And when people go to like when students go to study in colleges and universities, they carry a lot of baggage, so to say, with them, from primary education schools, to be specific. So I'll talk a bit about that first, and from there we can take it forward. uh, I also have slides with me, which I would like to share. So this quote from a paper by Sonalde Desai and Amit Thorat, sums up the importance of primary education. Reduction in educational inequality at the primary education stage can have a long-lasting impact and could be the most leveraged investment a society can make. But do we see this kind of investment in the primary education sector? Just a second. So I have a case study. I work for this NGO called Junan Foundation, and for a couple of years we worked in this ashram shala, or a boarding school meant for tribal students in Maharashtra, in a village called Gunj. And we used to go there on weekends to teach students English and maths mainly. But more than the learning atmosphere, or the kind of education that they were getting, what stuck to us was the kind of facilities that were there for children to live, because they were living there. It's a boarding school, so they were living there. But we were really like, we felt really sad to see the condition that those students were living in there. Maharashtra has more than 500 such kind of boarding schools meant for tribal students, in which more than 2 lakh students study. But their conditions, are really bad. Like, for example, in this particular school, there was no separation between where students lived and where they studied. So they used to, they used to study, or they used to be taught in a classroom during the day, and that same classroom used to be their, bed at night. They used to sleep in that same classroom. They would like move away the benches and they would sleep there. So there was no separation, between learning space and residential space. They did not have a separate building for as a hostel. Second thing, the toilet facilities, girls. It was a school, which had more than 300 students. It was a big school, from first standard to 10th standard. But girls had just one bathroom facility. Like, imagine for uh, girls who were about, they must be about 150. For them, they used to share just one bathroom and couple of toilets. And boys did not even have that. They used to take baths in the open where the tap was. And for toilet, there was a hill nearby where they used to go there for that. And even in winter, they used to take bath in cold water. The food also was not great. we s- we used to go on Sundays, and that day also we did not see them getting meat or fish or eggs. They would get veg, one veg sabji, and that used to be so watery. We would see children throwing away the water from their plate, and they would like eat somehow. So when you have these kind of conditions, how do you expect those children to study, to learn? Because if you don't get good food, if you don't have place to sleep properly, your basic needs are not taken care of, would you how would you expect them to study properly? uh, so we were not surprised that seventh standard students did not know English alphabets, or they could not do subtraction, addition, even those basic things that uh, you know they would find hard. We read Pratham surveys every year. Fifth standard children can't read second standard uh, textbooks. Those kind of headlines we see every year, but we don't know the reality behind that, like what kind of conditions these students are studying in. uh, these are schools, these are the schools that are run by tribal department. So there is a separate department that is handling the schools, and there are funds that are dedicated to this activity. Bina would know more about this. But even then, even basic things were missing from these schools. And this is not the case only with this one particular school. This can be observed across Maharashtra. So there was a survey by these scholars recently, which found out that 77% girls in 17 ashram schools of Maharashtra were underweight. And I'm not surprised at all by these findings, because uh, we went to a few boarding schools meant for Adivasi students in my taluka, and conditions across them were similar. So I don't find this surprising at all. And the issues that I just spoke about this particular school, those can be observed in this report as well, that there was no separation between learning space and residential space. And you know tens of or hundreds of students have to share one bathroom, one toilet. So when students are studying in these conditions, how many of them meet the requirements of about poverty, etc. And in that also he says that most of the poor are found in among Adivasis. People who descend into poverty, more of them are found in ST group. And people who manage to escape poverty, the number of Adivasis who manage to escape poverty is like, the number is the least among all the social groups. So we have these marginalized social groups who already have you know lower human development indicators, be it poverty or other things, livelihood issues, and that reflects in their, like, but we can't just blame on those poverty levels, etc., because government has a lot of policies and budget allocations. For example, these schools, they are meant only for ST students, and there are funds dedicated to these schools only. But even then, we don't see any results. I feel this happens for a couple of reasons. One is that implementation is not proper, or the funds might, I don't know much about funds, but it's possible that funds are not enough. And second is that when there are separate schools for marginalized groups, what generally tends to happen is that everybody else just neglects them, be it policymakers, politicians, or even the civil society, you know, uh, because they don't have any emotional investment in them. Their students, people who are in these positions of power, their students don't study there, and they don't have any connection with this social group or these schools. So these schools face a lot of neglect, and these, because primary education suffers, these students either drop out, or even when they go to colleges, the kind of courses that they'll choose will be BA, BSc, uh, after which there are not many job prospects. So the only students from these groups who would manage to go to so-called good colleges or professional courses would be if they are slightly better off than rest of the their group members, or they are like exceptionally talented. Those are the only students who go to colleges and universities. And even then they would face different kind of discrimination and other prejudices in those spaces. So I feel that we need also to talk about primary education, or I feel we need to talk about it more than higher education, because this is the basis. If this basis is faulty, if it is not given proper attention, or the facilities are not good, we will see that reflected in higher education as well. I would like to I would like Veena and Amit to take this forward from here.
Um, am I to speak now or is Amit joined? I don't know. I can't.
Veena, I think you can start. I don't.
Okay,
Amit can talk after you.
join later. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tejas. I think that's really, really a good case study that you have showed us there. It's the situation similar across board. I think if you look at the hostels in even the Dalit SC hostels across like Bihar, Rajasthan, the situation is the same. You know, children are sleeping in the same room, they are studying in the same room. I remember visiting a hostel once where the rains, there were floods, and all their books, their clothes, everything was washed away because they were on the lower ground floor itself. And I remember going there, and instead of being in school, all of them are sitting and drying their clothes and drying their books and all because they're not able to study. So I think that situation across board is the same. But in terms, we need to also think that there is right to education, a law that says that children have to be educated up to a certain age, that has to be implemented. So I think what is the problem, and I think you said it correctly, the problem is not the lack of funds, or the problem is not the lack of policy. There is policy, there is funds, but we need to push for implementation. And what does right to education mean for a child from the Dalit or Adivasi communities is something that we really need to look at, and we really need to push. And I know there are lots of organizations, civil society, small grassroots organizations who are pushing for the single most important thing that we need for our community is definitely education, where we push our children into education. Having said that, I want to look a little bit broader on the overall. The role that was given to me was mostly to look at budgets and how and what we're talking in terms of the economic rights and economic justice for our community. Overall, in India, we have about 4.6% of the total GDP, of the total budget that has been GDP spent on only on education, not so much Dalit Adivasi, but just education in general. The demand has always been to increase it to 6 point. There is a campaign called Nine is Mine, where 6% you will allocate for education and 3% for health. In countries like US, on health they spend about 15% of their GDP, whereas we spend less than 3%. I mean, you just think how horrible our systems. I mean, we have seen it during COVID as well, how horrible our healthcare has become, has is, even for us to access is difficult. So with less than 3% allocated for health and less and about 4.6% for education, some of the higher developed countries like Norway, etc., have 6.5. That is a norm that most developed countries allocate the allocation that is kept for education from the total GDP. But I also want to say that a lot of the policies in India have been very well thought of. Let me place that on the table. For example, we are one of the few countries. I think Brazil is the other country, and maybe South Africa is the other country, which has a targeted budget, which means that we have a budget that is specifically targeted for Dalits and Adivasis, which is known as the Scheduled Caste Subplan. I'll stick to the old name. It has a different name. It's called Development Plan. Many other names, Social Welfare Plan. So I'm going to stick to the original name so that people also hear me, understand, because that's the most common. So Scheduled Caste Subplan and Tribal Subplan. Schedule caste subplan is, what does it say? That proportionate to the population, the funds has to be allocated. This is the demand. Jadhav committee came up with a very clear guideline as to how these funds have to be allocated. How much 16.6 and 8.6 for Dalits and Adivasis. And they've also very clearly mentioned that it has to only go for three criteria, which is development of the basti or the hamlets, of family oriented schemes. So like, for example, Indra Awas Yojana, etc., and individual schemes, which is scholarships, for example, Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship or post metric scholarships. So these are the three kind of categories that we have to ensure that these funds are allocated for. What is happening is what I want to get, and then I'll get into education. You can stop me. I don't know how much time I have, but probably I'll speak for 10 minutes, and then we can ask the other panelists too. So what is happening is that this allocation which is there is great. The policies there, it's not a law. It's not a law at the national level. It doesn't have any legal backing. The legal backing is only, they have a law in Telangana, Andhra, Uttarakhand and Karnataka. These are the four states that they have a legal backing for this. And this also gives a lot more, it's more ground in a better and effective implementation if there is a law. So that is also one of the demands, that we have to have a law at the national level to legislate these policies. But for example, last year alone, the total expenditure budget of estimate of 1920 was about 3 lakh crores, almost approximately. Out of which, if you look at only the development fund, what is the development fund? Education, health, social sector schemes, all that, if you take, it's about 898,000 crores. The due allocation. So the due allocation of this pie of 898,000 crores is 139,000 crores is for Dalits, and about 77,000 crores is for Adivasi. This is what is actually allocated for due allocation. So this is what we have to get. But instead of getting 139,000 crores, there's something called a 10A and 10B, which is, the statement of Dalits and Adivasis when you look at the budget book. The 10A statement clearly gives only 83,000. So already they, instead of giving a 16.8%, they've already cut it down to 9%. So 9% of 898,000 crores is about 139,000 crores. So already there is a, sorry, 83,000 crores. So already there is a cut in what they're giving us. So what they're allocating, there is already a cut. Apart from that, where this money is going. So 83,000 crores is allocated, and we think that this 83,000 crores will come to the community. It should come for land development, it should come for health, it should come for education, primary, higher education, medium. But what they're doing with this money is, out of this, how much is actually coming to the ground is something that we really is really shocking. What is coming to the ground out of this total pie of 83,000 is only 16,000 crores. The 16,000 crores which is coming to the community and which is reaching the community is only for schemes on education, health, and etc., etc. The rest of the 55,000 crores, which, sorry, the 67,000 crores goes to non-targeted schemes or non-targeted issues. For example, we have done a lot of analysis on how these budgets are spent. And for example, they are buying guns in Chhattisgarh with this money, or they're distributing Diwali sweets with this money, or they're building swimming pools. And when we question them, they're saying, "Q, Dalits and Adivasis don't swim," but it is not in our basti, it is in some random place. Helipads, they build helipads with this. They build stadiums with this. In fact, the 2010 Commonwealth Games, the stadium that was built here in Delhi was from the TSP money from Delhi, which we actually made a hue and cry. And finally, the government accepted in Parliament that this is a money that has taken from the tribal subplan. So this 67,000 crores, which is going for the non-targeted, that is going for schemes that has absolutely no benefit. Now, because there is no plan, and as you all know, no plan or non-plan, and they're all mixed in the one budget, what is happening is they're putting PF, they're putting salaries of random schools of in the money that is supposed to come. So the 67,000 crores is a big, almost like a huge, a scam, because we need to see why that money is not coming to the community. This is one big aspect of the policy. I don't know if somebody else has come. I would like to speak on education, but probably after this, after the other speaker, if he's
No,
coming.
Beena, please continue. Amit is
I'll
still
continue.
not-
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if Amit is coming today.
Okay. So then from now, if we look at from this from the 67,000 is the non-target. What is coming is the 16,000 crores. From this, what they have been doing is, if we look at higher education, 62 as per the ASH data, 62, I'm only focusing on higher education. I do understand Tejas saying that we have to focus on primary education. There are a lot of organizations that are doing it. Our primary focus is trying to see how we can get more and more students into higher education, for the simple reason that we need, when we're talking about employment, when we're talking about fact that people have to have a livelihood, we have to ensure that our people are in technology, our people are in agriculture, our people are in, nuclear science, all the different areas that are there, medicine, etc., etc. So that's the area that we are focusing on. That's the area that we are been tracking the post-metric scholarship for a very, very long time now. What is happening is, over the years, in the last ASH data, if you look at the total number of students who have been enrolled, I think it's about 62 lakhs. Now, let's remember the 60 lakh students are only students who are enrolled and are eligible to get the post-metric scholarship. We'll just look at post-metric scholarship. There's also Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship, which is not much. I think it's only about some 2,000 fellowships in the whole country, whereas the post-metric scholarship has to be for at least the whole, anybody who's eligible. It has to be for anybody who's eligible for this scholarship. 62 lakh students as per are enrolled. These are students who have got access who have been able to enroll in a university. There are many other students who've not been able to enroll. We are not looking at that group of students now. Over the last 5 years, or since 2014, the budget for the higher education, or the budget for these post metric scholarships, so post metric scholarship is from 11th and above, have been slowly dwindling. It was 6,000 crores first, then it came to 4,000 crores, and then it keep coming down to a point where last year the allocation was some 2,000 odd crores. I think 2,800 crores was last year. This last year, last 3 years, there was a amount that was not released, which was more than about 12,000 crores. We made a hue and cry. So imagine, we have had students who have not received their scholarship, and I'm sure many students in this group will also have experience, or also know somebody who has experience, has not received their scholarship. Today we are here, talking about this. Today's, I think, also the birth anniversary of Rohit Vemula. We all know how and why Rohit Vemula had to, it's of course an institutional murder. We all agree to that. But the events that led to that, what has happened, is very similar to what we see in many cases. Many students who don't receive these scholarships, they don't receive these scholarships for 3 years. We have had students who finish the entire college, and what happens, many of them go into debt because they go and they borrow from private donors. Private people who give money on a very high rate of interest, and go into this debt trap. So somehow this whole aspect of not getting scholarship is then putting our children into debt trap. That is one aspect. The other aspect that we've been tracking in this time during COVID, what are our students doing without a scholarship? Are they going into work? Are they able to manage? Are their families able to? And we found out like shocking details where many of our students have gone into labor work. We know this, they many times we have seen this over, but this on mass scale, they have been, many students have gone into domestic help, these are MPhil PhD students. I'm not talking about 11th 12th or college. These are students who've struggled and come to a point in their life, who are doing, many of them are working in Manrega work. I have known many students who personally, who I know, are doing Manrega work, where they're going and working hard in the fields. And I receive calls almost on a daily basis. Ma'am, can we have a job? Can you find something for us? So this whole aspect of not receiving the scholarship and the implementation of this policy is really need. We really need to push the government to ensure implementation of this. What happened about 4 months ago is the government took a decision that they want to, as you all know, earlier there was a sharing pattern where there was a 60% share from the state and about 40% from the center, and this was a sharing pattern between the center and the state. About 4 to 5 months ago, they decided that they want to scrap the whole thing. They want to do away with the 60-40 sharing, and only give a small amount of 10%, quoting the 14th Finance Commission guidelines, saying that there has to be tax devolution. So the budget has to be totally, these schemes has to be totally borne by the state. Although education is a central subject, they still wanted to push that burden on the state. What we did in several organizations said you can't do that. They also, at one point, we had discussion with the ministry. At one point, they also wanted to give a separate exam for the post metric scholarship, so that another exam in addition to the fact that they have passed their 11th or 12th. Even that we opposed strongly. But what we're seeing is a mindset of continuously putting these barriers for the youth of this country from these communities to actually access these scholarships, to actually access these schemes, so that they're able to complete education and get jobs and get into the labor market. And I think these are some of the, we really need to counter some of these barriers that they're putting, in addition to the fact that the budget that has been allocated is not spent at the end of the year. Today, just today, we are just doing a pre-budget campaign before the budget is released on the 1st, and we found out that 47% of the total, I'll just look at the figures here, total budget has not been spent, the SCP. So almost 43,000 crores have not been spent. So they have February and March to spend this money, and we all know that that money is not going to spend. So what we say, what is known as a notional, this is just a number in this game of numbers where they put it in the books, and the implementation is so poor. I'll stop here. I don't want to be too technical, so that if there are any questions and if others also want.
Thank you, Beena. That was really good. Like you spoke, gave us a lot of figures to think about, and like you pointed out that there are like two problems mainly. That at one level, government is trying to reduce the funding that is it is allocating, and second is the age-old problem that implementation is really shoddy. There are a lot of questions in the question box.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Yeah.
Yeah, will take them, but I want to ask, like, how do you look at the encouragement that private sector is getting from the current government, and how is that going to affect all these policies, budget allocations, and also reservations? Uh,
Yes. Yes,
yeah,
I think,
because
Tejas, that is a big worry for us. That is what we have been also thinking. How do we counter this? One is definitely privatization is anti-Dalit and anti-poor, and it's taking away the basic human right of the government giving free education to children. So what they're going to do is they're going to privatize these schools. Many of these schools are already PPP models, so they're going to privatize these schools, and then it becomes very difficult for our children to even access these schools, because they have to pay money, or they have to give a high fees to address this. But the worrying thing is this is happening across board, not just education. The public sector companies, like all ONGC type of companies, many of them are already being sold to private sector. And so what happens is our peg the reservation peg is not in the private sector. The peg of reservation is on the public sector, is on these companies, on the government jobs that we talk so much about, where we have reservation affirmative action. So our whole idea of what reservation is, actually slowly they're pulling the carpet under our feet, because then we will not have as many jobs in the public sector, because everything is becoming privatized. So one of the demands, I think Udit Raj has, the MP, former MP, has always been putting out this demand that we need to demand and we need to ask for a reservation and affirmative action in the private sector. I think without that, we cannot go ahead. Prakash Ambedkar ji also has done a campaign last year on how these huge public sector companies are being sold to private sector, and because of that there is a huge threat to our jobs and our livelihoods, because obviously we don't have reservation in private sector. So that is a huge worry. From education up to jobs is going to be a very difficult terrain for us to deal with. So I think somewhere this government is using us as a political tool when it comes to the elections, just as numbers, but not really ensuring that we are able to get jobs, get education, and be able to give that adequate amount of budgets and money to ensure that this is happening. So this we see very clearly in this government's antics. Not that the previous government was anything great, but the fact was, with the previous government, at least there was a space to dialogue. you could sit and you could say, let's think about an alternative. Whereas here, they're almost closed to any dialogue. So whatever they say, you can see very clearly with what they're doing with the farmers' laws. As they don't want any space to dialogue. So it's very difficult to get through to them. Somehow we managed, with all the organizations pushing. Thoraji led a campaign to ensure that the post-matric scholarships do not get defunded, and they brought back that, and they have committed and 7,000 crores this year for the post-matric scholarship. So let's wait and watch. On Monday we'll know whether that has been allocated or not. But yes, this whole privatization is really, really a threat to all of us. And I think we really need to go up in arms against these policies that they're bringing in, because that will have a very long-term effect on us and our communities.
Yeah. There's another question. There's one question in the chat box. We have to accept that when students from marginalized groups enter colleges and universities, they enter with a baggage of many disadvantages. Do the universities have mechanisms in place for these students to flourish? In the same vein, what are some of the responsibilities of the public universities in this regard? Can you talk
Yeah,
to
I
that?
think, let's take one of the highest so-called educational institutes in this country, which is the IITs and the IIMs, right? If you look at IIT, there has been just in IIT Madras, I think if I write my numbers, that last few years, there has been about 18 suicides of children from young people from the marginalized communities, which says a lot in a in a university that is so highly regarded for its educational excellence. We have our children going and almost not able to deal with it. So I think, yes, there is always the there we did a quick analysis of a group of students in IIT Roorkee who were suspended because they said that they were not getting enough marks. But then when we actually went into doing the fact finding and looking at what actually happened at the end of the day, we realized that the students were there not because they couldn't get the marks, but there was a whole circle of discrimination where teachers kept on taunting them that aap category student hai, this is what they keep on saying, you're not fit to be here. There is an incident where I read in one of the news reports where a young boy went to the canteen to get tea, and he was delayed for his course, for his class. So he told the person who owns the canteen, who was a Brahmin man, can you please quickly give me the tea because I have to rush, while he was doing some puja or something. And the man turned around and said, "Tum logon ka औकात ही नहीं है, and you're coming and asking me for tea. You don't even fit. See, you've come and you're demanding tea from me when you don't even have the औकात to be in these universities." So comments like this, and teachers themselves forget about students, and of course, then there is peer pressure from students themselves to say that you're not here, you're a category student. How can you be here? You're not fit to be. So these kind of comments also give a very a very difficult situation that the students are put in. So such higher institutions of learning also have such kind of discrimination, and the baggage that we come from is because we're mostly from rural backgrounds. We may not be dressing we may not have the most stylish clothing. We may not be able to speak so fluently and so articulately, and that is being taken as as a disadvantage. And then, so I think that it's so important. Thorat committee, guidelines are there where they were rejected by AIMS after the AIMS case. A committee was formed. I think some of those guidelines are really important and critical to follow. But apart from that, I think there is already the equal opportunity cell that each college and university should have. And I think it's important that we have to have that with representation from faculty, from the community itself. We need to have, I know that there are clubs already formed, like in IIT they started Ambedkar reading circles. So we need to also strengthen our own Bahujan groups within the universities and support them to ensure that such kind of such kind of cases can, if there are any cases, can be taken. So I think there are some mechanisms, but we need to strengthen those mechanisms more and more. I know, like for example, in Ambedkar University in Delhi, there are many rules that are being changed for students not to not to avail of scholarships, and they're putting many barriers. So I think we need to keep on challenging this. But in terms of the systems, I think there are some systems we need to ensure that they're there. And also, I know that there are informal groups, advisory groups, where academics, professors, students all come together and support each other. I think that is important to continue to do, but we have to ensure that the government, one, the universities take cognizance of the fact that these spaces are not really inclusive, to push the universities to have more inclusive spaces, more sensitization workshops. Sometimes I feel, Tejas, that the responsibility of this shouldn't lie on us. The
Right.
responsibility of this should lie on these universities. I don't think we should be taking on that, because we are not the perpetrators. It has to be their responsibility. And sometimes the onus of taking this and the responsibility on our heads is so much that we ourselves are not able to manage. So I think somewhere the responsibility and onus of annihilation of caste has to be with the dominant, and not with us.
Yeah, you're right. And Bahujan's groups can't also be everywhere. Like we have so many universities across the country, state universities, which don't get any attention. Like we know cases about IITs, IIMs, and other big universities like JNU, etc. But what is happening in towns, smaller cities. So government has to ensure that. And Thorat committee, I don't know why those recommendations were not implemented. And the equal opportunity says that you mentioned, they also, a lot of colleges don't have them,
Have,
or
yes,
if
that's
they
correct.
have, then they are not functional. So there are some policies, but they are not implemented. And I feel that the role that Bahujan professors can play, that that can be an important role, but there is no proper implementation of reservation also. Like I read today only that IITs don't want to implement reservations at all.
Yes,
They
they are planning to, yeah.
Yeah, and IIMs don't do anyway. So if there were enough SC, ST, OBC teachers in these universities, colleges, the Bojan students could have gone to them, but we don't see them. So that's another problem. I feel that reservation also needs to be implemented properly. So Bahujan students can, at least go to Bahujan professors and, complain about what is happening. There's another question here. I think that was meant for Amit, but Amit is not here. Could you talk a bit about the disparities between social groups and historic context behind the same? In one of your works, you have stated that education can be one of the ways to reduce poverty, but the same economic backwardness holds socially oppressed groups from achieving better educational qualifications. How do you suggest we address this conundrum? We just spoke about this, like how the marginalization gets reflected in learning and kind of jobs that Bahojans end up getting in the end. So how do we address this?
I mean, I think I'll just quote what Baba Sahib said. Baba Sahib said that education is what makes one fearless, teaches him the lesson of unity, and makes him aware of his rights, inspires him to struggle for his rights. And I often go back to what Baba Sahib said, that and how he must have felt, when he was, that the load of emancipation of his community must have been on him so much, and how he must have been able to address that within him, the consciousness of that. I always think of the struggles that he must have had as one single person. Now we have so many of us. The fact that Tejas and Beena are able to have this conversation is because we've had some form of formal education. We are able to speak in the same language and communicate. At that time, this kind of support that we have, we may not know each other personally, but at least we know that we are there in some space somewhere. That would have been so difficult. I think that yes, education is and should be continue to be the number one priority for ensuring that our students get education. And I think I have seen in my own families, in my own friend circles, where just one person, one child from that school, from that family, was able to pull the entire family out of poverty. That one child was able to do. I know many of my friends who've come from very poor backgrounds, who have the first person in that particular family to get educated, gone abroad, are able to pull. So I think we have such successful models in this country, where, and I think we have to go back to that for inspiration. We have to see that how this is really helping, that one person, to pull the entire family, not the entire family, many times the entire village. He continues to inspire. I myself have some colleagues in my team who are first generation learners, and who tell me that when they go back to their villages, who the first person or the second person from that village to get educated, the whole village looks to that person for inspiration, and ensuring that their children also can follow. So somewhere this whole aspect of education is something that that's the only thing that we have. We don't have land, we don't have other we don't have political clout, we don't have other resources that we can fall back, but we can fall back on ourselves getting educated and getting a job. The fact that I'm sitting here is because I was able to avail a good education and be here and be able to lead an organization, a national organization, is because of that. No, so somewhere I think we need to fall back on this model, these models that I'm talking about. I'm not sure what Amit has written in his book, because I've not read it, I've not gone through, so I will not answer the first part. But the fact that education is and should be one of our priorities in ensuring that we are able to go ahead.
Yeah. Anirudh Taggart has a question. What is the panelist's view of civil society initiatives for scholarships and fellowships, that is non-government, specific to SC, ST, OBC students? What kind of organizations should be involved in encouraging scholarship funding support?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And just the other day, we were talking about this. Earlier, there was the Ford Fellowship. I think many of you must have heard of the Ford Fellowship, where a colleague of mine, Adhikar, I don't know, he's no more today, but he was one of the first Adivasi boys to get this scholarship, this Ford scholarship, and then go abroad to study. Ford stopped that scholarship. That was, that was given to SC/ST. There is a Felix scholarship now that several of our children have got. But I think that we were just thinking that, can we think of a consortium of donors to come together to build a very strong scholarships that we can give only to Dalit and Adivasi or Bahujan students. It's very important to do that, and we are still discussing if we can do that, if we can do something like that. And a national organization like NCDHR have are in touch with many of these donors. So this is something that we're also looking at and thinking that maybe it's high time that we push these donors to put in some money to ensure and give scholarships, especially for students to study abroad, because that is where many students get admission but do not get the funds to go abroad. So somewhere we need to push that, where we are discussing with many donors on how this can be done. If it is done, then I think it will be great. That if this is not something that is very concrete, but we are having some of these discussions, because there is a huge gap in these private scholarships that can really help our students.
Yeah, I think, I mean, government should be doing this ideally, but because it is not, we have to look at these options as
Other
well.
resources, yes.
Yeah. Um, why do we have separate schools for marginalized groups? Doesn't that accelerate caste discrimination as people of marginalized groups have only contact to their group? Is it because they live together? Uh, I so I think I'll talk about it a
Yes,
bit.
Tejas, yes, please go
Then you
ahead.
can also chip in. So the I don't know why and when government started boarding schools for Adivasi students specifically. I don't know what the reasoning behind that was, but if I had to guess, it could be because if there are only Adivasi students in a school, it's easier to give focus attention to them, and also because in lot of regions Adivasis have their own dialect, their own culture. So it's possible to teach them in their own dialect, or to you know have separate, not separate curricula, but curriculum that is designed or modified to their needs. So that way it is helpful. But as I mentioned in my opening comments also, what tends to happen is that they face a lot of neglect. uh, Nobody else from other than Adivasis themselves, or if they are meant for Dalits, except Dalits, nobody else cares, and they face neglect. So that is what. But about discrimination, actually, in these schools, because they don't have other social groups, higher caste, upper caste, there is no discrimination as such, because it's only Adivasi students there. So they actually have an atmosphere where they can flourish if they get good facilities, if they get good teachers. So these schools can work if they get proper attention from the government. So I think there are some pros to having separate schools, and there can be some cons as well. uh, but personally don't know what the government's thinking behind this was. Would Bina like to chip in?
Yeah, I endorse whatever you said, Tejas. I think that's very right that because there is no other in the classroom, where there is no dominant caste, this the easier learning, and most of these children are from the same social backgrounds, so they are able to link with each other, and they're able to and most of these schools are also very close. Like if you take for the most of these schools are very close to where they live in their own, near their bastis, or very near to their, I think there is some it's 1 to 2 kilometers or something, if it is first standard to third standard, and then fifth to seventh there's a little bit more distance, so there is some distance, some logic to that distance. So that also helps because many of them cannot go far away for schooling. So that is one thing. But I also think that it's important because in many of these schools where we have seen, for example, we documented some cases where children were discriminated in schools. And one case I remember where, I always say this, many, if others have heard my other talks in where I have said this as well, where this young boy was sitting under, during lunchtime, he was sitting under a tree by himself and eating lunch. And there were many other children in the school playing and eating together, but they were all in one group. And so we went and we asked him, like, why are you sitting here? And he said, no, I'm just, sitting because, I want to eat. But then when we kept on asking him, like, no, but why are you not joining the other students? Why are you not sitting with them? Finally, he said that finally, he was such a, we were so impressed with his resilience. I don't know sometimes if that is a good thing or I don't know what, but he didn't want to blame them, even though they ill-treated him and they discriminated against him. That Dalit boy just finally he said, after so much of probing, he said, "No, मैं Dalit हूँ ना, तो I cannot sit with them. They don't sit with me for lunch." And so these kind of things don't happen when they're in one school. But I also want to bring out the how the talents among is being honed in these schools as well. They may not be the most greatest schools. Like for example, social welfare schools in Andhra is one good model that you can look at, where we have had so many students come out of there and are successful. The young girl who I just keep forgetting her name, who climbed the Himalayas. She's 13 years old, Adivasi girl, who could have never had that opportunity if she didn't go to the social welfare school. So there are these, they encourage each other because they come from social background. So I think that it's also important, because unless they have these special mechanisms. And I disagree with many people say that in essence, I think you have also said, the person who asked this question, that we are perpetuating the caste system, but it's not, because this is also giving them an opportunity to be able to have the same opportunities as other students.
Okay. Uh, there's this question for you, Beena, from Shilpa Sen. I think it's follow up on our earlier discussion. Philanthropy and big private donors giving scholarships for education and employment. People, for example, Arundhati Roy, in her Capitalism, a Ghost Story, always critic the receptions from Bhujan caste for receiving them. Why is the burden of battling corporate philanthropy upon the already marginalized, who use these scholarships for survival? Barring their opinions, how can we consciously resist the insidiously malicious intentions of such capitalist philanthropic initiatives?
I think I really don't know what to respond to you, to be honest. Somebody asked us once, why, as NCDHR, why do you take foreign contribution? We accept foreign contribution. We have donors, including the UN and other donors, Oxfam, who give us, and many of them asked us this question. Many of us ask us questions like, why do you keep flying to go to conferences? Why do you take, flights to go to? These are questions that we've asked asked over, the last, I've been in this sector for 11 years, and I've always heard questions like this. And my response has always been that, all these years, for the last 70 years since independence, people have been doing this. People have been doing this very thing, flying around for conferences, having nice offices, having good computers. But the moment that, as Dalits, I feel sometimes that as Dalits, when we start also having those same resources and having those, why not have a good computer for my team? Why not have a good office to sit in? Why shouldn't we go for conferences? Why shouldn't we do that? So it's the same argument here as well, that I do understand that, these are philanthropists who are, who believe in the capitalist mode and free market, etc., etc. But I think somewhere, these scholarships also help us. Many of our students have been helped, by it. That doesn't mean that we're falling into the trap of, or we are going to go into, what businesses they're doing. That doesn't mean that. But if that is helping somebody to be able to stand on his 2 feet or her 2 feet and be able to get a livelihood and employment, then why not? That's a support that we have to accept. I don't see anything wrong, so much wrong in that. When it is wrong is when we are selling our ideals and our ideology. And I think without doing that, if we are able to sustain this, then I think it's perfectly okay. I don't know. I may sound really bad, but I'm really sorry, because I have seen many of these scholarships helping our students, and I wouldn't advise anybody to not take it. So, and for people also who are saying not to take it, also come from privileged backgrounds, where they have got that privilege because of something that happened similar like this maybe 20 or 25 years ago, and we seldom forget to mention that. So when we are also questioning others, I think it's also important to question our own privilege, and where we have come from, where the dominant people have come from, or caste have come from.
Right. There are quite a few questions about diversity in economics and if lack of diversity affects the economic scholarship and how we can make the field more diverse. Oh,
Yeah,
Beena, would
I
you like
just
to go
quick,
first?
yeah, just quickly respond. I think now this is becoming like an interview between Tejas and Beena
No.
rather than a panel discussion. Okay, I'll just quickly say, just a very simple example I'll give for this. I have been probably one of the few Dalit women in the country who talks on economics and who talk on budgets and budget rights and economic justice. But I have found it so difficult to enter these spaces, even though I have the national campaign on Dalit human rights name with me. Still, I have heard conversations where people have said things like in one of the conversation when they asked why there is no representation, why haven't you called somebody from NCDHR who have been, we are also one of the organizations that the finance ministry engages with when they're making the budget. Why don't you call somebody from NCDHR? And this is what that person said. That person said, and I think it's very relevant here. He said, I'm not looking for political I don't want to be politically correct. I want to have my content right. To say that as Dalits, they don't have content. And I was so shocked because I know this person very well. I've engaged with him on several. This is what the whole aspect. And when they're talking about, although within NCDHR we've done a lot of work on budgets, economic rights. Earlier, Paul Divakar was heading this wing, and he did a lot of work on this. But still today, when they look at us, they will not look at us as budget experts, but look at us as a movement organization. And there also I feel that, so this is a very closed net, where you have to really push for them to actually even accept that somebody is an economist, or somebody is somebody is working on this. And this is something that I've always faced as a woman, as a Dalit woman, to be able to talk on budgets and economic rights in itself is so challenging. And on top of that, they don't even recognize I'm almost like invisible in many of these spaces. But I think the idea is to keep pushing, keep talking about it, whether anybody listens or not, because we have to ensure that we have economists and we have people talking on governance, budgets from from our community, because this is so important and critical to and central to development, for us. And I think the right way is what the budget economists are doing. This is fantastic. When I saw, I was so happy that somebody started this initiative. And I think please continue with this, get more younger people to talk about it, push them. I think it's wonderful that this itself can become a model at some point in time. So thank you for this initiative.
Yeah, you are right. Like you mentioned that, people don't take you seriously in economic fields, or, they don't look at you as budget expert. That's what tends to happen. If you talk about caste, then you become caste expert, and that's it. Even though, your core
Exactly.
expertise might be somewhere else, you know. That tends to happen to people who are already in these fields. But there is like severe lack of SCST OBCs in, like, not just economics but all the other fields. Like, I'm not an academic or economist, but I can talk about academia broadly. As I work at DPW, I get to like see a lot of academic output. So uh, it's because the field has such less representation from marginalized communities, that also gets reflected in the kind of scholarship that is produced. That may not always be happening consciously, but subconsciously does happen, because people tend to work on topics that they personally find interesting, and the kind of topics that a set of people who are from a narrow pool, the kind of topics that they'll find interesting will also be narrow, will also be limited. And one does see that everywhere. And it's not just when they talk about caste that you know we see their ignorance or prejudice. It's also when they handle any of the other topics, because caste system is something that is pervasive, that affects
Yes.
all everything else, right? There has been a great critic from gender point of view, but we haven't seen critic from caste point of view you know becoming mainstream yet. And therefore these are the things that only people who are from SCST OBC background they talk about. It hasn't gone that mainstream yet, I feel. It's slowly catching up, but diversity is something that we severely lack, and I don't know when we will reach a position where there will be enough bahujans in all of these fields, including economics. Now, I read Amit's papers, over last couple of weeks, and he's working on agriculture, he's working on poverty. These are the topics that have been handled by economists for decades. But the kind of scholarship that Amit is producing, you see a difference. Even though he's talking about the same topics, the way he is talking about it is slightly different than other economists, and that is because he comes with a certain kind of sensitivity when he approaches the topic. And that is why I feel that SC/ST OBCs being in all these fields is important, because their own personal experiences, their own social background does affect the kind of scholarship that they
Scholarship.
produce. So it's not just a matter of justice and fairness. Um, it's also, the quality of scholarship, that also you see a difference. We have to talk about these topics because, it's a matter of justice and fairness, but it also does affect the quality of the output. There's a question from Amrita Sharma. Is there a way for schools, both public and private, to include an Ambedkarite narration of representation of Indian society without demonizing the mainstream narrative? Would you like to take that, Bina?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm sure there is. I'm not, an expert in academics or what, curriculums should or what should be taught. I'm not such an expert, but I think it is important, and I think that is something that, presently now, under this present government, it is becoming more and more clear what is it that they want to teach. So slowly they will start removing these icons of both Dalit Bahujan icons. And I think somewhere we need to look at the way that Ambedkar has framed his arguments and be able to. I'm sure there is a way. I don't know now because I've not really worked on what can be taught in schools, but I'm sure, and I think it is also important to continuously and constructively look at how we can bring Ambedkarite writings, Ambedkarite, dreams that he had for his community to be reflected and to be taught in schools. I think it is so important.
Yes, I feel that even if the people who make the syllabus, who write the textbooks, if they stick to objective narration of events and all those things, that also will be very helpful. Uh, there was a case recently in Karnataka where there was a mention of Vedic society and Brahmins or Vedic rites. I'm not very sure what exactly it was, but that right-wing group wanted that part to be omitted from the textbook, and which was immediately accepted by the government as well. So we see that threat has been also mentioned under the current government, but that you can't progress by hiding things. We have seen that in the case of caste system, that the popular wisdom was that we should not talk about it and it will go away on its own. If we talk about it, then you entrench it more. That was the logic. But we know that that is completely false. A problem is not going to go away on its own. You have to challenge it frontally. And it's the same with history. Like that's the most contested part in syllabus. Like history is where a lot of political actors want to intervene, but you can't gloss over certain parts, you can't hide certain things. You have to present the history the way it has happened. We don't see much mention of caste system in history textbooks, and that leads to a lot of people being shy of discussing the topic altogether, or having very misguided notions about how the caste system develops and how it operates. you know like hearing people say that caste system was invented by British, or it was uh, entrenched by British, you wonder like what kind of education these people had, or what kind of narrative is prevalent, about this issue. And that happens because we don't talk about this issue honestly. So I feel that whoever is making the syllabus, they have to be honest about all these things. Science
Actually,
is
they
considered objective. Sorry.
no, please finish. I
Yeah. No, like science, maths, people don't really have much problem or contention there, generally speaking. But topics like civic science and history, that is where uh, politicians want to intervene, or civil society groups want to intervene. But we need to, if we stick to like whatever is has been accepted by academics as the like the right narrative, that itself will be enough.
Yeah, but it's so scary sometimes when I think of, if this government even wants to include something like that, that how they twist facts, no? Where they recently said that, Ambedkar was pro RSS, so they can also appropriate such. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
the key is honesty, is how are they representing the facts is also so important. But I was on a BBC interview once with this person, a researcher from London, who was, speaking very well. And suddenly he says about how caste has come from Europe, and it's not an Indian thing as well. And he's actually a scholar who's doing a research on this, got huge amount of money, I'm sure, to do this research. So and he's a pro RSS. I mean, he was very clear. He was very clearly saying all this. So I think somewhere they're also spending so much of money and resources to make these narratives, and many people will believe this, who will read such narratives. So I was really shocked that they're spending so much of money and resources to do such kind of work.
Yeah, there is that threat which we don't know how to fight, because those groups have more resources. So, and they also have people in positions of power that they can influence. So it becomes really hard, like we are struggling for basic things like education and
Yeah.
livelihood and health. And, with that, we also have to fight this propaganda. Like if you spend even a day on Twitter, these arguments you will get so much. Like, the the what you said, that caste came from Europe, and how they argue is that it's because caste is not an Indian word. It's a
Castas, no?
Portuguese, yeah,
Hmm.
Portuguese word originally. So this kind of arguments and I'll not be surprised if these arguments become mainstream and also
Yes,
become
yes.
part of textbook at some point.
Yes, definitely. I think it will. That's the most scarier part.
Yeah. There's a question about scholarship. I think going back, actually no, about Thorat committee. What are the barriers for the Thorat committee recommendations to being implemented? Is something lacking legally, or is it once again policy prioritizing?
It's just lack of political will. That's all. I mean, that's the single biggest reason for many of these things to function, you know. I think, I don't know if you all saw the recent report that Oxfam came up with, that during the COVID, this COVID lockdown, the billionaires have made some 64,000 crores or something like that, a huge sums of money. And during the lockdown, so where they are able to, where they're able to put their money, and where they want to build, they are building. Where they don't want to build, they don't need any reasons for it. They just don't have the political will, and they don't want to implement these policies. That is the only that is the only thing that is stopping them. Otherwise, there is resource in this country. Let's not fool ourselves. There's a lot of money in this country. There is resource in this country. They can, they can implement these policies. They can have people, have monitoring cells in each district to ensure that the money that is coming down to the districts can be monitored. They have to have, like Prevention of Atrocities Act has district vigilance committees, at the district level, to monitor the violence. Like that, they should have these district committees to monitor how much money is coming up to the panchayat. I think Kerala is able to do it a little bit, but other states, they are not able to do. So there are mechanisms, there are resources, there is money, there are people. It's only, I think, the single biggest barrier to many of this is only the lack of political will to implement this.
Okay. I think we are towards the end of our time, and I'll ask you one last question, and then we can close. So, what do you expect from the budget? Like, we'll have a budget soon in a month. What are you expecting, and what would
Yeah.
you want the government to do new, or even like take forward?
Okay. I think one of the biggest things that we're really looking forward, the budget is going to be presented on Monday, I think. Yeah, Monday is first, right? Yeah, on first. So the biggest thing that we're expecting is the 7,000 crores that they have committed for the post-metric scholarship. That's a huge increase, because last year it was only some 2,800 crores. So from 2,800 to 7,000 crores is a big increase, and we are hoping that more students get it. That is one major thing that we're going to monitor and see if they're giving. The second thing is that we really want a social security for our people. That during COVID, many of them were without jobs, without benefits, health benefits, without not able to access health. So I think some minimum social security for the communities. We are hoping that she announces any something like similar like this, because of the experience of the COVID. These are big things. Then apart from that, of course, allocation for land, increase in allocation. There's only some 140 crores for the implementation of the Prevention of Atrocities Act. There's a huge increase in crime since 2014. So we are hoping that they give more money. Also post Hathras, that they realize that they have to put more money for the implementation of the Prevention of Atrocities Act. So we are also hoping that they give that money. We're also hoping that they have some new schemes for Dalit women, because there's only upon 0.08% of the total budget allocated for Dalit women. And we're hoping that there are some schemes for specifics. Many of these schemes are archaic, and there are very few schemes for Dalit women. So we are looking forward to some health schemes, education specific, education, hostels for Dalit women. So these are some of the major demands of ours, and also hoping that they're reflected in the budget this year.
Thank you so much, Bina, uh, for all your insights. You have worked, you know, in on ground so much, and all those experiences you put in your answers. Thank you so much. I think Jaya will conclude the session.
Thank you, Tejas. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Tejas and Beena, both of you, for engaging with us. It was very insightful. To the audience and to you also, we would like to apologize for the absence of Amit. We are not sure about what happened, but we are sure it was something urgent. and series that would have gone down otherwise we would have known. So yeah, we would like to apologize for Amit's absence, but thank you so much, Tejas and Beena, for engaging in such an interesting conversation, and engaging with us and accepting our invite to be panelists for this session. And thank you for the audience to join in and for all the interesting Q&A. We would be taking forward this conversation tomorrow. All the three organizations, Rethink Economics India Network, Bahujan Economists, and Mang Prayog Shala. We would be concluding our event series on diversity and representation in economics with a workshop. And we are conducting this workshop on the topic of structural privileges and its percolation into individual behavior and how it plays out into classrooms and universities. So we would love to have you all engage with us in that workshop. And yes, so hopefully see you tomorrow, and and you can find out more about the organizations, and you can definitely follow the panelists and find out more about them on Twitter and other social media handles. And yes, thank you so much everyone for joining, and have a good evening and have a good weekend. And thank you again, Tejas.
Thank you,
and Beena.
Jaya.
It was
Thank you.
lovely.
Thank you, Tejas.
Thank
Bye.
you,
All the
Jaya.
best.
Yeah.
Thank you.